Hi folks, right, we'll get started. Thanks so much for coming along this afternoon, and really chuffed to be able to have some time to explore the excellent topic of bale grazing with a fantastic set of farmers. So quick introductions. I'm Nikki Yoxall. I work for Pasture for Life, and my role there is as head of research, and my job within this project is to coordinate this innovative farmers field lab. So we have been supported by the Soil Association through the Innovative Farmers Project to undertake this 5-year assessment of bale grazing and its impacts on soil health, soil quality, soil organic carbon, and we're also looking at forage. So this is like my 5th talk today. I'm starting to flag a little bit if I'm not making sense, so apologies. So yeah, we're going to predominantly hear more from the farmers rather than going through the details of the project. I think at this early stage, all we want to do is really raise awareness of what we're doing, and how that is playing out for farmers who have all actually been using this practice for a little while now. So whilst we're in the first year of the field lab, actually they're pretty experienced at running these systems. So we're going to go through some presentations from each of our farmers, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions. So I just at this point also want to highlight that, as I said, we've got the soil and forage aspect of the project, but we are also now being supported by AHDB to undertake a cost-benefit analysis for all of the farms involved, because we recognise there was a need to explore the economic and wider system benefits from these system changes that these farmers are implementing. So I'm going to hand over first of all to Claire, and I'll let them each introduce themselves as they do their presentation, and then we'll have questions at the end. So Claire, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Claire Beaumont. I'm from Gabriel Hall Farm in the Lake District. Here is a picture of our cows eating a bale that has been rolled out and has been sat out all winter. You might see a few similar photos of like this today. So before I go into too much detail on the bale grazing, I thought I'd just share a little bit about our farm. Our sort of overarching grazing strategy, and so that I can explain a little bit as to how bale grazing sits in there. So here is a photo of our farm. For those who know the Lake District, this is Ullswater in front of us. I'm standing on Hallenfell. So we have at the moment 63 head of shorthorn cattle. Those are kind of what I'm probably going to focus on today, but we've also got some fell ponies and pigs. So our overarching strategy on how we manage our grazing is that we have, for most of the year, our cattle are mob grazing in that sort of lower 160 acres of meadows. We do make hay from one of those fields every year, and we rotate which field it is. So that's usually kind of what we call the growing season, but I'd say in the Lake District it's very flexible as to when that growing season is. And then the whole time that we've got the cattle mob grazing the meadows, the rougher area, the rough grazing, the wood pasture is growing. We have very minimal grazing there, and that is kind of our deferred grazing for winter, essentially. So it's a fairly straightforward grazing strategy. So I guess the question is, why do we do bale grazing, and how does that fit into there? So we was getting to a stage, so Sam and I have been managing the grazing like that since about 2019. We've been managing the farm since 2017. Prior to then, the farm was managed quite intensive sheep grazing. It had sort of 20 years of annual grazing licenses, a lot of fertilizer spread on. So there's quite it's quite a bit of recovery for the farm to do. So we were finding it came to around February, end of February, and the cows, even though there was loads of grass, or appeared to be loads of grass still left in the winter block, the cows were just kind of complaining at us. So we had an option of, we had some areas that were still deferred, so we were letting them into those areas in March, and they were just still complaining at us. But we really wanted to hold back from putting them into the meadows to do the mob grazing, because to do mob grazing you kind of need a bit of grass in front of you so that you can get a good recovery and good long rest periods. So in 2021, I'm sort of losing time. 2021 was a really tough spring for us as well. It was really cold, and then it was really dry, and nothing was growing, it felt. So we kind of made the decision, let's have a go at bale grazing. So I think we had about 15 bales that we put out. We just kind of let's sort of dip our toes in it, put them in a really rough field that we didn't really care kind of what happened too much. And we just gave it a go, and we found that rolling out bales of hay is actually really good fun. The cows were happy, and so we thought, let's do this, let's carry on. So this year we've kind of gone for a slightly different strategy. We've got that field there that's surrounded by red. It's probably our worst field on the farm in terms of biodiversity, soil health. We use soil mentor quite a bit in terms of across our fields, and that one's definitely the worst performing one. As you can see there, it's very yellow, lots of buttercup. So we thought, what can we do to this field? We thought we'll just kind of have this as our innovation field, kind of let's just try out loads of stuff. We have put most of our other meadows into species-rich grassland restoration through hiatus stewardship, but this one, in order to do that, had to do quite some drastic measures, which we weren't really very happy with doing in terms of not disturbing our soil, for example. So we thought, let's try bale grazing, see if that makes any difference. And then this innovation farmers was quite, because it came up a very good time, so we thought, let's join it part of that. So we have got, it's a 12-acre field. We last grazed it May last year, so it was rested for about 10 months. We put the cattle in very end of February. It's 32 head of cattle, so it's not our whole herd. It's basically the cows, steers, and then we wean our calves in sort of November time, so they're elsewhere on the farm. So we worked out that the cows actually needed about 1.5 bales a day. So we were rolling out a bale, but we're also taking a bit more hay out to them on the quad bike each day. And it lasted us through March, and it sort of just it works quite well in terms of a bridge really between winter and the growing season, and just gets the grass going that bit much more. So it's really kind of helpful as part of our grazing plan. So I'm going to show you a little bit as to what it looked like before. So the hay is made on an adjacent field, so we literally just move it from one field to the next, so it's much less tractor work, having to bring in bales into the shed and things. The bales sit out there all winter. They survive the much rain that we get in the Lake District. I think it's about 1.7 metres of rain we get a year. It's pretty wet. It's known for wet, being the Lake District. And what we were quite surprised about was how little we lose. I think we've worked out it's about 10% of the bale that the cows don't eat, and we kind of think that's fine. That's kind of like, instead of using black plastic, we'd rather use hay, and it just gets rotted down. So next photo this is what it looked like straight after bale grazing. So generally, there's still quite a lot of thatch over the soil, so we are protecting. There were some areas of poaching, which is slightly inevitable with that rain we get, but that's fine. We saw that as an opportunity to sprinkle some extra seeds, stuff that we might want to include. And then here's what the field looked like. I wouldn't like to say that we've converted it to a species-rich hay meadow, because that's not going to happen in 1 year. But there's definite changes. There are some areas that are still about 95% buttercup, but I think that was probably like that before anyway. But there's definitely some species coming up that we didn't know before. We didn't use species-rich hay. But there's definitely some that are coming from the other fields across. What we might do next year, I think we're going to have make a few changes. I think we might actually put out twice the number of bales that we did, so we don't have to be driving hay on the quad bike every day. I think we will be having more cows because our herd is growing, and we do have a source of species-rich hay from a nearby, another farm in the Lake District. So I think we'll be changing the strategy slightly, and just as the years go, just see if we can make minor improvements and little changes here and there.
Amazing, thank you so much, Claire. And what I didn't say at the beginning was that I actually wanted just to make sure that these guys all had the opportunity to tell you about their farms before we kind of gave you more information about the spread of the field lab, because I think actually it's important that you hear from them and you get some real kind of detail about what they're up to. So we're going to hear from Silas next. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Silas. I'm the farm manager at FAI Farms, which is 1,400 odd acres on the edge of Oxford. We are also a global research and consultancy business. So a lot of what we do is around data and actually looking into what we're doing on farm level. And outwintering and bale grazing has been a real integral part of our transition from what was conventionally managed organic grazing and arable farm until about 4 years ago when we went down the whole regen route. So yeah, the field labs are an opportunity to do a deeper dive into this aspect of what we're doing. So we've bale grazed and outwintered for the last 4 years. So a little bit of context, we are on a floodplain, so 60% of our farm will probably go underwater at some point. We're on medium heavy clay. So a lot of people thought when we said we were going to start bale grazing outwintering, it will never work on your farm. It's too wet. Well, we found a bit of the farm that won't go underwater, but it is still in a valley with lots of springs and on that clay soil. And it's, I guess what we've seen so far is really not what was expected by a lot of people before we went down this road. I can't actually remember what I put in my slides, but we'll see how we go. But yeah, that gives you an indication of what it looks like in our winter routine, that aerial shot. I basically take the 80 odd hectare parkland block, split that down into what will be a daily move. So I do all the maths, all the planning is key. So I'm doing that now, or we're doing that now. Basically figure out what's the group that you need to outwinter, what's their daily feed requirement, and then do the maths on that. You get the size cells you need and whatever deficit that might be, how many bales you need to add in. So for me, it was 160 half hectare cells last year with 5 big round bales of hay. And it's worth doing that planning. And, the key is we like to use the term adaptive multi-paddock grazing and underline that word adaptive. So if it is very wet, maybe they get a hectare, they get 2 days worth of cells, or we move them more frequently. Again, planning. What happens when we get a big freeze? So with the water, we made the investment after the first year where it didn't work as well as we'd hoped, basically because the water infrastructure wasn't in place to really move the cows how they needed to be moved around the block. So in terms of the economics of the water, we spent about £7,000 mole ploughing in, 50mm pipe with, a water tap riser popping up every 100 or so metres. Then we can move the water with the cows more effectively, and with it being underground, it's not going to freeze. So when we get a cold snap, we only have to defrost the 1.5 foot of tap above the ground, and just make sure you leave spare pipe on a slope. And then when it thaws, you've got pipe that isn't frozen. So it's little things like that can all of a sudden make the routine really work, where you're not spending hours a day trying to solve a problem like frozen water. Return on that £7,000, we did some cost savings on 2021 figures compared to if we'd housed those cattle. And we saved £1.36 per cow and calf pair per day. So ease of maths, times that by say 100 cow and calf pairs over 180 days, you get about a £25,000 saving if we'd housed them. For growing stock, that was a £1.49 per head per day saving. And you know, that was back before we saw even higher inflation than we have now with farm input prices, you know, feed, fuel, etc. So I imagine those cost savings are probably higher than when we did those figures. So that basically that water infrastructure paid itself back in that first winter plus extra on the cost saving. And sorry, I just lost my slides. Again, tools for the job. So make your life easy. We do everything on basically a quad bike. You know, we've modified. We put a rig on the front to do the reel. We put a hoop on the front. You can jump over the fences in a box. So you're not spending hours walking out, putting up fences. You know, it's got to be efficient and slick. Sorry. Ooh, God. Here's the planning. So this is the kind of thing that I'll be doing at this time of year. So that's a rough map of our farm. You can see those red lines on that most bottom patch on the map. That's basically the parkland where we're outwintering. So when we make hay on our floodplain meadows, which we can't bale graze and outwinter on because they will be underwater or massively wet, we move them straight into the park in the summer from the field instead of having to double handle them and put them in a barn and take them out again. So for every square, we will place out 5 round hay bales. That's all done. So by the end of August, everything for winter's ready. I don't think about it until I put the cows, the day before I put the cows in there, come December time. And we just go and put the fences up and away we go. Again, it's, you know, I do the maths to make sure this will work from the 1st of November until the end of April. I know I've got 160 days of grazing in there, but I've also got a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. You know, we've done this in the 2 wettest winters on record. We didn't have to get to plan C or D, which would be to put them back in the sheds. But with the right planning, you know, we navigated, you know, a really wet, tricky winter. Again, adaptive, underline that word. So if we can see it's going to be, you know, 1-2 degrees, driving wind and rain, when the cows are going to be uncomfortable and cold. They don't mind it when it's -20. They don't mind it when it's like 6, 7, 8 and wet. What they don't like is when it's cold and wet and windy. So we make sure that, thinking about one of our ecosystem processes of airflow, we make sure that we get them to where that airflow will be less, where it can be warmer. We get them around the tree lines of that parkland. You know, use your hedgerows and things like that, looking ahead on that weather. Essentially, that cow is converting that free, cheap stockpiled pasture and hay into high-energy milk for the calf. So she's doing all the hard work. So we keep the cows and calves together all through the winter, and we wean in like April before the first calf is due in mid-May. Then that cow goes into calving, perfect body condition school, and the calf is kept as skinny. You know, instead of wean them, for example, we'd have to be doing like bespoke diets of high energy, high nutrition, wrap bales of whatever to those calves. They probably still wouldn't do as well if they just stayed with the calf. You know, we're finishing livestock in 22 months. That's our average finishing time. Slowest are going in 24. That's with everything being outwintered. Again, we're Pasture for Life certified, so that's not buying in feed. We have no ghost acres. You know, we're not using cake. We're not finishing on barley. So that's, I guess, one part of that story. It's the economic side of all of this, where we have this huge cost saving because of the outwintering. Actually, our cattle performance and those efficiencies are better than ever. We've shaved about 6 months off of our finishing times when we were conventionally managing everything in the organic sense, i.e. everything was set, stocked, housed in the winter, finished on barley. That was 28 months was our average finishing time. It's now 22. Same genetics. We've not changed the herd. You know, obviously some bulls have changed, but that's about it. You know, with the biodiversity factor as well, it's amazing to see how quick all this has changed. If I can find a picture, as I said, I can't remember what I put in my slides, but you know, half of this parkland 20 odd years ago was maize. It was monoculture maize, and you can see what's come up. We've not put that seed there. That's just been sat in the latent seed bank, and some of it's probably come up from our floodplain meadows. But just using the 3 things that we can control, which is grazing, animal impact, and time. The animal impact part of that is probably what has caused this, you know, massively improved diversity in our swards. we're finding orchids and wildflowers that we'd never really saw on the farm at all before. All of this change happened after the first winter. So 2, 3, 4 winters down the line, we're just seeing more and more benefit. Our infiltration rates in this park, Tristan, who does our soil samples, he did some infiltration rates a couple of weeks ago, and it was over 2 hours to do the infiltration rate 4 years ago. It's less than 30 seconds now in the same field. Again, thinking about your ecosystem processes, how do we manage for carbon, water and minerals and airflow 12 months of the year? And a lot of it is down to the planning. It's right, if we can't photosynthesize in the winter because things don't grow, because everything, your soil microbiology goes to sleep once your soils get cold enough, how can we still manage for carbon? Well, unrolling that hay, trampling in that more carbon-rich stockpiled forage. Again, it's all to do with the planning. So we don't want to graze everything off to the ground. Similar to Claire, we can see in that picture as well, like what we're leaving behind, there's still green leaf there, and it bounces back so quickly. The park now looks like that picture on the right. We'll go and graze that again now, kind of end of June, July, and we just make sure we shut it up from the 1st of August to stockpile through. So yeah, we've seen massive benefits. And it'll be really interesting to take a bit of a deeper dive with this project.
Thanks so much, Silas. It's amazing already to see the differences between two systems in the same field lab, and I think that's what's really exciting about this. And you'll see again from the other two on the panel what else we're going to see. I think we should go over to the next presentation. Cool. Over to you, Ian.
Good afternoon. I'm Ian Horsley from the Pasture Hall Estate. We're a small mixed livestock enterprise. It's a sort of small diversified estate with a residential holiday and conferencing facilities. We've only had cattle on the farm for just over 18 months. We were solely 100% sheep before then, but we sold those and moved into a cattle enterprise. It's our second calving year. We've got currently running 49. Well, there are 49 on farm with calves at foot at the moment, and a handful of sheep. This is the setting. We're just in the northern end of the Malvern Hills, of outstanding natural beauty. That field at the bottom, just above the farm buildings, was where the Bale Grazing was in the first year, 2021-22, and at the top of the photo was this winter just gone. I'll show you some good stuff and some horrors as well. It's not all good. We got the cattle in November 21, and they went straight out of the trailer and into this field, which I had set up with 45 bales for 14 cows and 10 calves, which are sort of 14 livestock units. I had worked out. I basically wanted. I had to sort of suck it and see. Really, the first year didn't do quite the calculations that Silas did, but I went for a bale a day. On a fairly small, tight zone, and had to work with that in the first year. At the second, I did 2 fields that year, using sort of 90 bales across the 2 systems. The second field was slightly larger, had a bit more spacing, and I learned that was a bit better. So this year I gave them more space. This was fairly high impact. It was a poor field right by the farmyard, and it needed a bit of improvement. It needed some stimulation. It needed some feed. So this provided all of those things. As you can see, they're fairly small zones. The early conditions in November were amazing. That's great conditions as far as I'm concerned. They didn't leave a great deal. They had good trampling. I again was taking a little bit out in a quad as well. I discovered they needed about 1.25 bales a day, so I was just topping them up a little bit, so I didn't have to move them first thing in the morning. December it got a little bit wetter. Some of these. I did start to question what I was doing at this point. Even more so the following week. As you can see, it's not always perfect. And the bale in the zone before, I skipped that zone. I left that bale behind. I decided I couldn't go anywhere near it, so I came back to it later in the period. But the question is, what's the recovery like on something like that? That was in December 21. That's 14 months later. You can't see it. It bounced back. It was absolutely fine. I've dug holes there. I've checked the soil. There's no major compaction. There's no difference in that zone than in the other zones in the field. I'm quite amazed, really. It came back there a lot better than it has done in this year's mess ups so far. That's the zone I was looking at. So I had a 5-6 day window of really wet weather that I had to deal with before they left that field. It was beautiful in November on the right hand side of the field. But that's at the end of the first winter. I'll just run you through how it progressed. That's 6 weeks later in February. 2 months later. 4 months later in May. It's looking good. Everything's growing back really well. Same time. There's a few patches where there's bales that have been rolled out and they haven't eaten everything. I was a bit worried about that at the time, but this year, the following year after, those areas they're really exploding with growth. It's much greener in that area. It's almost like it's made a big difference. It's just taken time to break down. And this year, looking at the patches where there's bales left behind, when I pull the hay off, all I find are worms. It's just stuff full of worms underneath it. Looks like there's nothing growing on the top, but it's just very active underneath. That's just an aerial shot 6 months later, showing you can still see the shape of where the cells were, but full field recovery. This year was slightly different. Obviously, we had a few extra animals because we've kept everything on farm, so slightly more to deal with. And I set everything out in a larger field, one big field this time instead of two different separate ones. I marked the whole field out in a 25 by 25 meter square, so not dissimilar to the kind of size of this tent really, with two bales positioned, one in one corner, one at the other corner. So I'd roll one down in the morning and then one roll across in the afternoon, and always underneath the electric fence, so that they don't trample on it and the calves don't lie on it, because the system's set up to same as at FAI, the calves stay at foot and the cows do all the heavy lifting for me during the winter, feeding that calf. We got through. We managed to get through 80 days. I was planning for 90 days in that field, but we actually I was planning for 80 days in that field, and I with 160 bales, and we got through 96 days in that field, and I still have 22 bales left that I've left in the field as a drought pod. So if we get a little bit unstuck this summer, I've got somewhere I can put the cows, and there's already feed waiting for them, and it hasn't been touched now. That corner of the field hasn't been touched for over 12 months, so it's a nice rest period for that. I've worked out we had quite cheap hay. It only worked out at just over £1.09 per day per livestock unit, as opposed to the period. I had a 2 month period inside, or a 1 month period inside this time, which is £2.82 per day per livestock unit. So it's a great saving having them outside. This year, again, we have really good conditions in November and December this time. Then we had a really nice cold spell. Cold, although it provides other challenges with freezing pipes and water, is fantastic. I found it really good. You can give them double zones. They can spend longer in a zone. You can roll an extra bale in. Snow in March was very challenging, mainly just because it made it extremely wet very quickly. Just spinning through. This is what it looked like last week. So there are sections of that field that were damaged, and I was pretty unhappy with the result. But when I look at it, it's a 25 meter strip that's about 3 meters wide on maybe two sides. A little bit of damage in the middle of the zone, but there's only 10 zones out of 80. And then it's only a small section of the zone. So I've worked out it's less than sort of 2% of the field is damaged. But I still don't like those bits of damage. There's heavy poaching, and it's capped, and it's taken until the rains just now for grasses to grow in those zones in a couple of little sections. But the rest of the field is amazing. In fact, the cows are on the left-hand side of that today. But there's definitely room for improvement. See, these are some of the damaged strips from this year's grazing.
Brilliant.
I think that's me.
Thanks so much, Ian, and thank you so much for sharing some of the more challenging days that you had over the last winter. And yeah, I think we've got a WhatsApp group for this field lab, and there were lots of, this is a bit wet, bit soggy. So yeah, there's lots of support for each other when that's happening. So our final farmer that we're going to hear from this afternoon is Stuart, and then we will very quickly cover the rest of the field lab and then open to questions. So start having a think about questions you might have. Stuart.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming to listen. I'm Stuart Mitchell. As you see, Whitrig's farm in the Scottish borders. We've run 140 suckler cows and 330 deer, all organically, and there's also some 50 hectares of cereals are now sold off farm. We've been bale grazing for four years now. Some big changes just over 4 years ago on the farm. The sheep went off. We realised we had at that period before the deer built up the numbers, we had a lot of grass that never got grazed through the summer, so we just a bit of googling and a lot of American stuff at the time. Thought we'll just stick some bales out across our hill and see how it goes. And at that time it was silage bales on their can, and we just cut the plastic off and then basically strip grazed it across the hill, basically like what you do with forage rape or something like that. And it worked well, but we knew it was working good enough to try it again the second year. And that first year was 50 cows for 2.5 months, and where we are now, we're 60 cows, and this is still in the exact same area. 60 cows for 5.5 months, and we've now moved on to hay. Basically the second year I wonder how hay lasts on our hill face, and I put one out for the end of each month, and it worked well. So after that we just went full steam with the hay, but we've moved into unrolling them. So our farm is basically a hillside, so we go from 500 feet to 1400 feet within 1,000 acres. So across the hill we set out 120 bales, and they basically get a 5-foot bale of hay a day for 60 of the cows. Further down the hill there's the younger 60 heifers and bulling heifers, and they get a 5-foot bale of hay a day as well, but they're on the lower ground just because they're a bit lighter. And we just strip across, we start at one side of the hill where there's a woodland and just work our way across the hill. And it's we work out that the diet is 50% hay, 50% grass. The grass will get grazed once midsummer, just to freshen it up, so there's green material there in the winter for them, and it's not all just lignified grass. And it's it's not just. I'll come back to that bit. As you can see, bales sit out basically a week after they're made in the summer. They go nowhere near a shed, and they stay remarkably good. Yes, there's a bit of dampness on the bottom, but those bales are packed as tight as a baler will put them. 5-foot bales are getting on over 400 kilos. Probably twice the dry matter of a silage bale or 2 silage bales. And they're sitting at 1,200 feet there, and that, I don't know what time of year that was. It was pretty late in in November anyway, and they still look pretty good. But if they get wet, they dry out because they're sitting individually. And if you keep them sitting tight to each other and then put them out, there's a lot of waste. But we just work our way across the hill. As you can see, very little waste and plenty, not massive covers, but just enough to give them a bit mixture through the winter. And it works out for us at 8. They put the bales at 8 meters apart, and it's it'll be about 300 metres long, and we just walk the fence from one end of the hill across the hill over the winter to the other. Yeah, it has, like, for us, that's right on the pretty much the top, near 1400 feet, bit higher up, and it has to work on all weathers for us. Well, there is still the sheds because that's what our old system was, but they get filled up by other things now. Yeah, it has to work in the cows. If they've got a full belly of grass, they're quite happy. They're not going to go back and look for shelter. If they are just not quite filled up, they'll start pacing about, and that's when they get unsettled. Whereas if there's that howling wind and rain there, but they're quite happy just on their strip up there. They're slightly further apart, the bales, but it's just poorer ground further up. Yeah. So as they come across the last 6 weeks pre-calving, so basically from the 1st of March to the 10th of April, they'll move off the hay and onto silage bales. I'm not sure we need it, but it's just the way it's kind of worked out making hay and silage in the last 2 years. And basically, if they go on the hill in good condition after weaning, as long as there's nothing drastic, they'll come back off the hill in good condition, and they come off 5 days before they're going to start calving, and it's we're not adding any extra feeding into them at all apart from moving from hay to silage, and it's just they're fit. They walk up and down the hill every day of the winter. We're fit. Well, Dad is. It's him that does it, but they're fit, so they're fit and fat, and so when they come to calving, they're like their body's ready just to push out a calf, have loads of milk to get the calf up and going, and away they go again and get back and calf. And we are 6 week calving, pretty strict, and so the cows have to cope with this system and get back and calf within 6 weeks, and no excuses. For us, for when we moved, there's still a handful, like the best ones go up on the hill, but there's still a little handful inside for a short length of time. We've done the sums last year, and as you can see there, on our system of 140 cows, putting them on the hill rather than a shed was 36 grand a year, and that's definitely the difference between profit and loss. It also pays, could pay an extra wage, could buy a new pickup, but also, and for those cows it used to take 4 hours every single morning, whereas it's now just 1 hour, and that's for all the cattle, not just the ones on the hill. So that's where the big benefit is for us. It's just, as much as we've still got some inside, we're desperate to get them outside as quick as we can. Good dung, just with hay, but also just a bit of green grass through the winter, keeps them firm but not too dry. If it's all lignified grass, it'll go like horse dung a bit, just too dry. So it's just finding that balance. I am one that would just wing it a bit to see. I'm not hard driven on my figures, and it's just trial and error to see how we get there. The whole farm, because the farm's heather right at the very top and then down to pretty good stuff at the bottom, it's hard for us to know exactly what every field's like, so we just give it a go. Here's this is the heifers lower down. As you can see, it gets wet, but when they move every day, they're always onto dry ground, even if it was pouring a rain through the night. Every morning they're onto dry ground that's not been touched since the summer. So yes, some of it will get poached in, and you could say utilisation's not the best, but it's not leaving that field. It's just food for next year's grass, and you just keep them moving. So that was November. Yeah, just about Christmas, just before Christmas, and that was mid-May this year, and so it's like up near the top was where that picture was taken. I was taken for a different angle, and yeah, you can't even see the fence lines. But we probably different from some of the others. We want that hay bale gone. Like we want the cows, when we move the fence, the cows to eat that bale of hay from, like, when we unroll it 9 o'clock in the morning. By lunchtime that bale needs to be gone. They then spend the afternoon eating the grass, and then sit down the rest of the day. We don't want stuff left over. Like, it's not waste, but we just want them to eat it up. And but you have to have enough and good quality stuff so that it is eaten. It's not just force feeding them. So that's how we don't have our clumps of hay. But this system works because the cattle are all mob grazed through the summer. We tighten everything up. Like there's 90 cows and calves in this group on 2 acres, 0.75 of a hectare a day, and that really slows everything up. Lets us get hay on our permanent pasture, and we basically just leave the bales there, and move some of them up onto the hill. And there's arable in it as well. So it's ridiculous covers like that, but it just helps the whole system work. And these covers, as much as they're big, diverse, like those will never get cut and taken off the field. They'll go into an arable rotation every 7 years, just for 2 cycles, and then they'll be back into herbal hay again. So we will wean the cows just before they go up on the hill, and then that leaves the calves in one big mob of 120-ish to go round one last cycle of herbal lays, which will take them through until early in the new year. They're then housed, and then for 10 weeks back out mid-March again onto the same herbal lay fields, and they've just kind of buffer it out a bit with bales of hay there. And because we just take like a 4 bale lifter on the tractor, 4 in the back, 2 in the front. You can take out like 2 or 3 weeks worth of hay in a couple of loads, 3 or 4 loads, and then that's the whole field set up for a month, and you can pick and choose what days you take it out with the tractor. But we also have red deer, works the exact same. Strip grazing up over the hill, bit lower down. This is a group of, there are 160 deer in this group with their calves. First time we've kept them on their calves on them right through until mid-March or 7th of March. And yeah, 5-foot bale, but in this case it's half a bale a day. We just unroll it in a U shape, and move it over half it the first day and then half it the second day. And it works really well. They respect the electric fence. It's only 1.5 meters high. Yes, last year there was one that just pleased herself, but yeah, even with our calves that have never seen a fence at the beginning, 1 day's training and they're sorted. Yeah, little plug at the end here. You'll see a red bale unroller over at the Pasture for Life. When we made our first one for doing this, we had no intention of selling them, and last autumn we kept getting people asking about it, so we thought we'd just make a few, and so we've got kicking on 15 of them sold now, and get in touch if you want them. But it's pretty simple. It goes in the back of the bike, and we leave it out in the field, unrolls the bale, and it can carry the bale, does 5-foot bales, does everything we need it. And that little machine is allowed us to sell our mixer wagon or bedding machine, and just massive savings on some. Like, as much as you can roll it out behind, but when they're 5-foot bales with a flat bottom, they're a bit tricky. And it's for the deer, it's easier if we go across the hill rather than up and down it. So I think that's me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stuart. And we'll just leave that photo up to show off the bale and roller. to encourage you to buy one. That one's actually sold, so you wouldn't be able to take that one away with you. So yeah, a little bit then about the wider group. So this is 4 of the farms involved in the field lab. There are 6 in total, and we've just taken a 7th farm on board who is being supported, who's one of the AHDB monitor farms, and is coming in because they've already been bale grazing and they want to get involved in the project. I thought it was really interesting, actually. I wasn't sure on the weaning strategy for these guys, and actually it's interesting that it's split, and the split is the other 2 farms actually are also an equal split. So half of our farms leave calves on cows throughout the bale grazing period, and the other half are weaning ahead of time. So that's an interesting difference between them. I thought it was really interesting that these guys are all pretty much doing daily moves. That's the same across all of the group. And there are obviously some other considerations to be made around how our cows prepped for winter. So that might be a question that we come to in a bit. You will see that most of them reflected the savings, and that's something that's really interesting. But what we're going to be doing with HDB support is actually to undertake a cost-benefit analysis that's a bit broader, that reflects things like, okay, well, if we haven't got animals in a shed all winter, but we're running a mixed farm system, where are we get an organic mixed farm system? How is that? Where's that muck coming from? How are we managing that? Where are the costs and benefits around that? So although these guys have all done the number crunching on how much cheaper it is for their daily wintering feed costs, there are additional costs and benefit around the system that I think we need to better understand. So we're looking forward to going into that over the next few months. And then, as I said, through the field lab, we're going to be assessing soil health indicators. So we've got a whole range of indicators that we're looking at, and also looking at forage quality post-bale grazing, all of which was informed by the only piece of research that has been done on this, which was undertaken in Canada. There has been absolutely no research in the UK on this system. So these guys are the very first cohort of farmers for whom we're actually meaningfully collecting data, and that we're able to then analyse that. What I would say is that we're not necessarily going to be comparing between farms. What we're interested in is the change on each farm, so understanding that shift. And hopefully, because of the work that we do at Pasture for Life, we'll be engaging with a number of academics who we hope will see this as a bit of a pilot, and then we'll be able to take that forward and start exploring this more, because we're seeing, with Stuart talking about selling 15 of these unrollers, we're seeing more and more people interested in this. So that's kind of a lot of information for all of you. I'd love to have the opportunity. We have got a bit of time, actually, sort of 13 minutes or so for questions. I'm hoping you've all got loads. If you haven't, I've got some saved. Brilliant. Hand flew up over there. So there is a roving mic. So if you could just ask the question. And to make sure we fit plenty in, if you've also got a question, just keep your hand up, and then our mic can, well, not for the entire time, but, just to help. Go on ahead.
Hello, my question is whether or not you're also looking at the water quality issues with soil erosion and runoff.
In terms of the field lab, we're not, but I would be really interested for you guys to talk about, are you seeing soil erosion and runoff? Because we saw a couple of, I'm going to say, shockers in there, but they were odd one-offs. And can you just talk, maybe Ian, you could talk, because you shared those photos, about those implications.
Yeah, absolutely. This year particularly, on the field, the way I grazed it, I went up and down the field. And in the first half of the winter, and the second half of the winter, I went across the field because I saw a distinct increase in compaction on that side, and I was getting more surface runoff. So I then started leaving the bottom strip as a buffer. It's in the valley bottom, so that to try and slow any runoff that there was. Because I didn't like the look of it myself. That water runs through the underground stream or whatever, and then comes into a pond. We've had our water tested, and it is perfectly safe for swimming. So I'm quite comfortable that it didn't filter all the way through the system, or it got captured somewhere along that way. I didn't like the look of it at the time in the winter when we got some heavy rains. So this time I'd be more inclined to certainly go across, possibly even leave anything at the bottom as a really nice big buffer, and work my way down the field.
Any of you have any I mean, you're next to you're a floodplain, so any reflections from you, Silas, on that?
Yeah, I guess for me, this is why I do the maths. So, I don't plan to take and graze all of the pasture in that cell. I'm going on like a 75% utilisation of the pasture, plus the hay and another buffer. So when they come out of the cell, there isn't often bare ground. Yes, you might get the odd cell that had a bit more rain, but that is in a valley and there's running ditches full of water on wet days, and I've never seen it not crystal clear. So I think at least in the way that I've set that system, I'm planning not to have bare ground if possible. If we know it's going to snow and it's going to be a thaw, I go out and I move them more quickly. Again, I keep going back to underline that word adaptive. Like, we have a plan, but if you need to kind of change and work around it, we do, to avoid things like that.
Okay, we'll move the mic along. Another question over there.
Yeah, I was wondering whether any of you have done fence line weaning, and how that has gone.
There's some nodding going on. How's it, Claire? You did fence line weaning, so I'm going to jump to Claire because you did some fence line weaning a couple of years ago for the first time.
Yeah, we've been doing fence line weaning for a few years now, and it works really well. We did it because the year before we had a massive failure. We put the calves in the shed and the cows found their way through several fences and a stone wall. The fence line weaning works really well because, in fact, what we do is we split a field in two. So we almost actually put them all in one side of the field, bring them all in, separate them out, or put them one side of the field, bring them all in, separate them out, and then put the calves on the better side and put the cows back on the side that they were originally. And so the calves don't care because they've got the best grass. The cows, we open the gate to the next field, and you tend to find, because in amongst that herd you've also got the steers and the other heifers, and they start to go through first, and the herd just gradually find their way, and occasionally it just gets to like the last day and you've got to push the last cow back into that next field, and it's done. It's quite straightforward.
Thanks. Okay, next question. I think we've got someone down the front here in a check shirt, and then we'll go over there afterwards. Sorry, making you run around. Thank you.
I've actually been doing a bit of Bale Grazing myself. I work for the National Trust as a farm advisor, and my main reason for wanting to encourage some of our tenants was to get the species-rich hay in, and that's been really effective just for anybody that is interested. We find it a very cheap way to get the seed in. But what I was wondering, have you had to reduce your stock in terms of, you're not resting that grass, and how that has affected your sort of bank balance and all that, or maybe if you haven't had to reduce the stock by doing the Bale Grazing?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I'm sort of understocked, so no. I'm using species-rich hay and moving stuff from my wildflower meadow across as well, so I'm doing that as well.
We started this system being understocked. It allowed us to start it, but now we're back up to the same stocking rate as what we were, and that's having the animals out all year rather than just for this 6 months this summer.
Silas, do you want to reflect? Have you changed the size of the herd?
Well, similar to Stuart, we're quite an odd situation, I guess, because we're a research farm, so what we do often changes and evolves quite quickly. So we did have sheep and we did pasture poultry for the first 18 months of our regen transition. We don't have either of those now, but we are trying to increase the stocking rate as quickly as we can. But we've had issues with TB basically. So similar to Stuart, what we saw is initially to get the farm in sync and working for the system, we did initially destock. But we're certainly at the point now where we would have the same or similar stocking rate pre-transition.
Let's also remember that if we're destocking but we're making significant savings, that's it's not just about output. Okay, shall we come over here? Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to ask a question? Okay, cool. Thank you. We'll go to you next.
Thanks to all the speakers. Yeah, I mean, I mean, what's not to like about this? It looks like a real win-win-win. I mean, we've tried something pretty similar. I mean, our biggest problem has been frozen water, and just getting water to them on those really cold days, it just takes the shine off it. Is there anything? I like Silas's idea of burying in pipe, and that's one way to go. But just any other tricks there? Anything you pull behind the quad bike, or just anything to make that easier would be greatly appreciated. And also the max mob size that you feel is appropriate for these cells.
I'm going to jump in on the water question because I'm actually one of the farms in the project as well, and sort of the fifth, but I'm staying quiet about that. But I will just say, in northeast Scotland, 57 degrees north, fairly long period last winter, just gone minus 15. Continuous flow trough was a complete game changer. So that was running off a burn into a cut down IBC with an outflow, and that just kept running even at minus 15. It was phenomenal. I was really impressed actually. I would also recommend looking at a freeze miser, which is a bit of kit that we had to import from somewhere. The only problem is that it kicks in at like 1 degree, and it's always 1 degree. Like that's warm for us in the winter. So that kind of creates a drip with a continuous flow, but just as a drip, which it might work somewhere maybe that is generally warmer if you're further south.
I certainly had a period of about 2 weeks where everything was frozen, and I just changed the cell shape so they could get back to the corner of the field where I had a trough, and I used a very high-tech chain hanging on the ballcock, and then throttled back the tap so that the flow was very, very low, and just let it run. And that worked. But it did mean there was a lot of trampling back to that corner, but the ground was frozen, so it wasn't such an issue. But it did increase compaction, which caused a bit of a problem later on.
Any thoughts on mob size?
I would say like our one 5 foot tightly parked bale does or 60 cows in that mob. Pretty like that number works well. 8 meters by 300 meters. I don't know whether it would be better if we put everything up there, doubled the bales per day, but gave them more area. But for us, it works out for a winter for 5.5 months. It's an acre per cow per winter. That's what the area is.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's not necessarily about the size of the mob. It's about finding the sweet spot between the feed allocation and not ending up with weird half bales knocking about the place. So that's probably something. That's why the planning, as Silas was saying, is so important. We've got time for one more question, which I think was the gentleman here in the middle. And then we'll be finishing up. So.
Hello. It's a simple question. Are you all on native breeds? Because they don't seem to take as much input as others.
Yes?
Yeah.
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 And all Pasture for Life members as well. So there's something in that maybe, I don't know. So
presumption on age, yeah.
I think actually, and the other farms in Northumberland, is that Angus? Yeah, but that's Angus cattle, is it? Yeah. So the other farms involved are all on natives. Brilliant. Okay, well we've got 2 minutes. So and that was a very short question. I thought there was going to be a long one. Oh, we've got one more. We'll go here. We'll go for one more question. This better not be a long one now, though. You've got a bonus question.
How does it work on silage? Can you do it with silage bales?
You used to use silage?
Yeah, it works perfectly well on silage. I don't know if that was.
But you will need a bale unroller.
Yeah, you'll need one of my bale unrollers. It works perfectly well. And I wouldn't worry about putting your very best silage out there, like good or bad. They'll eat it up. Don't worry about it getting trampled in. We don't put it underneath the fence. We kind of want them in the middle of our lane so that they can get in both sides. And they'll eat it up, and then they'll go to the grass afterwards. But we're having a bale unroller. We leave them on their can all winter, and then the day before we move on to silage bales, we just go up with a tractor and knock them all over onto the round, and they're just easier for the bike to get moving, basically.
Brilliant. Yeah, just one other thing, I guess, is that you've seen the majority of the bales are all being rolled out. We do have one farm that is a mix of either rolling out or leaving them all on end. So that is hay, not silage. But yeah, so we are getting results from both rolled out and on end bales. We're going to finish there. Just a couple of things to say first. If you are interested in innovative farmers, field lab, this field lab, other field labs, setting up a field lab, then Becky is in the front corner. So have a chat with Becky. If you're interested in how and why AHDB is getting involved, come and see Katie, who is at the front here. And I just want to say a huge thank you to the panel. It's been really great having it all presented. And yeah, it's fantastic to be part of this project. So big thank you to the panel. And thanks to you all for coming along. So have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.